Level 1, the before. The before, I want to tell you about the version of me that doesn't exist anymore. He had a savings account with a number in it that started with a 2. Not a huge number by any stretch, but a number that had taken 9 years to build. Sitting there in a bank app, I'd open on my phone every Sunday mornings just to look at it. Not to spend it, just to look. The way some people have a plant on a windowsill and water it and check it. That's what that number was to me. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in a part of the city that wasn't trendy, but it wasn't scary either. It was just regular. My couch was secondhand, but I'd bought a throw blanket for it in a store, not online, and that felt like an adult thing to do. I had a coffee maker that ground the beans for you. I had a bathroom with a shelf where everything had a place. I was 31. I worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company. It wasn't a calling. It wasn't a career I'd dreamed of when I was a kid drawing pictures of what I wanted to be, but it paid consistently. It had health insurance. I was reliable. And reliability, I had learned, is a form of dignity that people don't talk about enough. And then there was Daniel. My brother is 3 years younger than me. We grew up in the same house, shared the same small bathroom for most of our teenage years, went to the same school, ate dinner at the same table every night until I left for college. I know Daniel the way you only know someone you've shared a childhood with. Not just the surface of him, but the structure. I know how he holds his fork. I know the specific sound he makes when he's nervous. I know that when something is wrong, he doesn't say so. He just starts talking faster. We weren't the kind of brothers who called each other every day. But we texted. We showed up at each other's birthday dinners. We argued at Christmas about things that didn't matter, and were fine about it by the drive home. I trusted him. That's the whole foundation of this story. I want to be clear about that right now. Before everything else, I trusted him the way you trust the ground under your feet when you walk, not because you've verified it, but because it has never once given you reason not to. That was me. That was the before. I'm telling you about him now, because he is the reason everything I just described is gone. Level 2. The pitch. It started on a Tuesday evening in late October. I remember it was a Tuesday because I'd had a specific kind of terrible day at work. The kind where every meeting runs long and every decision gets reversed, and you drive home with your jaw clenched so tight it aches. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't even take off my shoes before I sat down on the couch. I just sat there in my coat, staring at the floor, listening to the refrigerator hum. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Hey, you free to talk tonight? Got something I want to run by you. I almost said no. I was tired in the deep down way, where tired isn't just a physical feeling, but a sort of grayness that settles over your whole perception. But it was Daniel. So I called. He answered on the first ring. That should have been the first thing I noticed, but I didn't. He sounded different. Not nervous different. Excited different. Like he'd been sitting somewhere waiting for permission to speak. He asked how I was, and I gave him the short version, and then there was a pause. And then he started talking. He talked for 20 minutes without me saying more than 4 or 5 words. He talked about something called TerraVault Protocol. He talked about smart contracts and staking pools and yield generation. He talked about a platform run by a group he'd been introduced to through a contact he'd met at a tech event in the spring. He talked about verified returns. He said the word verified a lot. I set the phone on speaker and walked to the kitchen. I filled a glass of water and stood at the counter, drinking it slowly while he talked. I wasn't tracking every word he said. I was tracking him. The quality of his voice, the rhythm of his sentences. And what I noticed was that he believed it. Whatever he was saying, he believed completely. That matters. I need you to understand that. Because later, when I tried to reconstruct the story, there was always this question underneath everything. Did he know? Was he running it on me the same way someone ran it on him? I still don't have a clean answer to that. But in that phone call, on that Tuesday, I heard a man who believed. He said he'd already put in $14,000. His own money. Money he'd been saving since his divorce. He said he'd already seen returns. He said he wanted me in. I told him I'd think about it. I put the phone down on the counter and finished my water. Then I opened my laptop, sat at my small dining table, and started searching. I spent 2 hours that night going down whatever I could find. There were forums. There were positive posts, testimonials, screenshots of dashboards showing numbers going up. There were a handful of skeptical threads that I read and partially dismissed, because the people writing them seemed angry in a way that felt personal, not analytical. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I didn't say last night, but I didn't say no either. And that, I have come to understand, is the exact moment where the door swung open. Level 3, the commitment. Over the next 3 weeks, Daniel and I talked almost every day. He would send me links, documents, screenshots of his own account showing the balance growing. He sent me a PDF that looked like a white paper, the kind of thing crypto projects release to establish legitimacy. I read it. I didn't understand most of it, but it used all the right words in all the right order. And there were names attached to it, people listed as founders, social media profiles I could click on. I Googled things, I fact-checked things. I asked questions and Daniel had answers, or he would say hold on and get back to me an hour later with a more detailed answer than I'd asked for. I was being thorough, that's what I told myself. I was doing my due diligence. I was also, somewhere underneath all of that, wanting it to be real. Because the number he was describing, the return I could expect on an investment of $40,000 or $50,000 held for 18 months, was a number that would change the shape of my life. It was a number that meant I could stop counting things, stop budgeting the way I budgeted, which was careful to the point of being anxious, checking the bank app every few days to make sure nothing had slipped. I want to be honest about that wanting. I think it's the most important thing to be honest about. I also want to be honest about something worse. I talked to other people. My coworker Marcus, who sat 2 desks away from me, and who I knew had some money in an index fund and had mentioned wanting to do more with it. I told him about TerraVault. I sent him some of the same documents Daniel had sent me. I wasn't recruiting him the way someone in a scheme recruits. I wasn't getting a cut. I wasn't even thinking about it that way. I just genuinely believed I was sharing something good. He put in 11,000. My friend Priya, who I'd known since university, who had just come into some inheritance from her grandmother's estate, and had mentioned not knowing what to do with it. I mentioned it to her over coffee one Saturday. I showed her the PDF on my phone, right there at the cafe table, my coffee going cold while I scrolled. She put in 8,000, and I put in $43,000. I transferred it over the course of 2 separate transactions because the platform had a verification step in the middle that felt, at the time, like a security feature, the kind of thing a legitimate operation would do. I remember sitting at my kitchen table after the second transfer went through. My laptop was open, and I was looking at my TerraVault dashboard, which showed my deposited amount and a projected earnings curve that swept upward in a clean, soft arc. I stared at that arc for a long time. I made a cup of tea I never drank. It sat on the table next to the laptop, steaming and then not steaming, and I just sat there in the quiet of my apartment feeling something I can only describe as the feeling of having made a decision that you can't take back, and not yet knowing if that's terrifying or exciting. Level 4, the collapse. It was a Thursday, 71 days after my second transfer. I woke up at 6:45 a.m., which is when my alarm goes off, and I did the thing I had been doing every morning since I invested. I reached for my phone before I was fully awake and opened the TerraVault app to check the dashboard. The app didn't load. I refreshed. A white screen with a small spinning circle that spun and then stopped. I thought, server issue. I thought, they're doing maintenance. I closed it and opened it again. White screen. I sat up in bed. I went to the browser and typed in the URL. The site was gone. Not down in the way, sites go down when they're having technical problems. Gone in the way that means the domain has been released, the hosting has been terminated, the whole infrastructure has been folded up and removed like a tent. I sat on the edge of my bed for a very long time. My feet were flat on the floor. I was still in my sleep clothes. The room was getting lighter in that slow and different way. Mornings get lighter, and I sat there watching the light change and feeling something move through my body that wasn't panic yet. It was the thing that comes before panic, the stillness. The moment where your brain is processing something so large that it can't move forward yet. So it just holds there. I called Daniel. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail, I texted. I typed the words, "Please call me right now," and stared at the message for a moment before sending it. And then I watched the screen, and the message sat there at delivered for a long time without turning to red. I got up. I walked to the kitchen. I turned on the coffee maker and then stood in front of it while it made noise, not really seeing it. I went back to my phone and found the forum threads I'd bookmarked. I went to the skeptical ones, the angry ones, the ones I had mostly dismissed, and in one of them, posted 2 days ago, someone had written 3 words. "It's gone. Everything." And below that, replies. One after another, people from different countries, different backgrounds, different amounts, all saying the same thing in different languages. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter, and I pressed my hands flat on the surface, and I stood there with my eyes closed. I stayed like that for a while. When I finally texted Marcus, I kept it short. I told him I thought something was wrong with the platform and that he should try to access his account. He called me back in 3 minutes. I could hear from his voice that he'd already seen the white screen. When I called Priya, she didn't answer. She texted back an hour later. The text said, "I know. I've been on hold with my bank for 2 hours. Please don't call me right now." I have read that text message more times than I can count. I have turned it over in my head the way you work a splinter you can't quite reach. Please don't call me right now. Not angry. Not accusatory. Just gone from me. Just needing me to not exist in her space for a while. Daniel finally called back at 2:17 in the afternoon. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known. He said he'd lost money too. His 14,000, the original amount. He was crying or doing something that sounded like crying. And I stood in the middle of my living room holding the phone and listening and feeling nothing. A flatness. Like the signal had dropped on whatever emotion was supposed to come next. I said, "How did you find it? Who gave it to you?" He said a name I didn't recognize, and then he said that person had also gone silent. I said, "You brought me in." He said, "I know." I said, "You brought Marcus in. You brought Priya in through me." He said, "I know. I'm sorry." Then neither of us said anything for a while. I hung up eventually. Not dramatically. Just pressed the button and set the phone on the coffee table and sat down on the couch with the throw blanket still folded over the back of it and looked at the room around me. $43,000. Gone, not in a crash. Not in a bad market. In a hole in the ground that had been dug specifically for me to fall into. Level 5, the rock bottom. The next 4 months are hard to narrate in sequence because they didn't feel sequential. They felt like one long, gray, continuous thing, like weather. I kept going to work because there was nothing else to do. I would get up, I would shower, I would button my shirt, I would drive to the office and sit at my desk and respond to emails about logistic schedules. And I would do all of it like a man underwater. Everything reaching me a little slower, a little muffled, a little wrong. My boss noticed. He pulled me into a meeting room one morning and asked if everything was okay. He was a decent man, my boss. He had a framed photo of his kids on his desk and always remembered my coffee order. I told him I was dealing with a personal financial situation. He nodded and told me to take care of myself, and that was the end of it. I stopped opening the bank app on Sundays, partly because the number in it was no longer the number that had been there. I'd transferred out most of what was liquid, and what remained barely covered 2 months of rent and expenses, but also because I didn't trust myself with the feeling of looking at it. I filed a report with the appropriate authorities. I filled out a form online that took 40 minutes and asked for very specific technical information about the platform and the transactions. A detective assigned to financial crimes sent me an email acknowledging the report. I never heard from them again after that. I know other people who reported the same platform. None of us heard anything after the first email. I started doing the math on Marcus. I would lie awake at night and calculate how long it would take me to pay him back $11,000 on my current salary, after rent and food and the rest. I thought about Priya's grandmother. I thought about that inheritance, money from a woman who had saved it over the span of a whole life, and how it had gone into a dashboard that showed a pretty upward curve and then vanished. I ate standing up at my kitchen counter most nights, because sitting at the table made me feel the absence of the laptop too much. The laptop I used to open, the dashboard I used to look at, the arc. I stopped talking to Daniel for 2 months. Not out of rage, exactly. There was rage, I want to be honest about that. There were nights where the rage came up in me like heat, real and physical. And I would pace the length of my apartment with my hands clenched and my chest tight, going over the conversations. The phone call on that Tuesday, the documents he sent, his voice when he said, "I wanted you in." I went over it all like reviewing footage, frame by frame, but underneath the rage was something harder to sit with. The knowledge that if the situation had been reversed, I might have done the same thing. If I had found something that seemed real, that had verification and documents and a person I trusted at the source, if it had been me with the excited phone call, would I have protected my brother from it? Or would I have pulled him toward it because I wanted him to have what I thought I'd found? That question sat in me like a stone. My lease was up in February. I'd planned to renew. Instead, I gave notice, put my furniture into a storage unit I paid 3 months in advance for because that was all I could manage, and moved into a room I rented from a couple in their 60s who lived on the other side of the city. The room had a single window that faced a brick wall. The couple were perfectly nice. We were perfectly polite to each other in the kitchen in the mornings. I was 31 years old, living in a rented room with a window facing a brick wall. And I had done this to myself. That's the sentence I kept returning to. I had done this to myself. Not Daniel, not the scammers. Me. Because I had wanted it to be true. Because I had sent those documents to Marcus, had shown Priya the PDF at the cafe table. I had been so sure. Certainty, it turns out, is one of the most dangerous feelings a person can have. Level 6. The new normal. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you about the recovery. I'll tell you the truth instead, which is messier. It's been 11 months. I am not recovered. I am in the process of something, and I don't have a clean name for it. Some days I think the word is rebuilding. Other days it feels less architectural than that. More like learning to walk on a leg that healed wrong, where every step is functional, but nothing moves the way it used to. I have a different apartment now. Small, but mine. 8th floor, window that faces the street. I can see the tops of trees from it if I stand at the right angle. I bought a plant. I don't know why I bought a plant, but it's there on the windowsill, and I water it, and most weeks it doesn't die. And I take that personally, as a small private win. I paid Marcus back 4,000 of the 11,000. I told him I would pay the rest. He told me I didn't have to. We had a long, uncomfortable conversation in the parking lot of a diner we'd agreed to meet at, standing next to our cars in the cold, with our hands in our pockets. At the end of it, he said he didn't blame me. I thanked him for saying it, and didn't quite believe him, and also understood that his not blaming me was a genuine act of kindness that I didn't deserve and was going to accept anyway. Priya and I had lunch in March. She initiated it. She texted me on a Wednesday and asked if I was free that Saturday, and I said yes before I'd thought about whether I was ready, which is probably the only reason I went. We sat in a restaurant and talked about our food and the weather and some mutual friends, and didn't talk about the money until we were almost done. And then she brought it up simply, like stating a fact. She said she'd decided not to carry it. She said it had taken her a while to get there. She said she didn't want it to be the thing between us for the rest of our lives. I nodded and looked at my plate. I said, "I'm going to pay you back." And she said, "Okay." Not dismissively, but gently, like she was accepting the intention without making me feel like the debt was the only reason I was sitting there. I drove home from that lunch and parked in front of my building and sat in my car for a long time, not crying, not feeling anything large, just sitting with the fact that there are people in my life who have absorbed a genuine harm I caused them and chosen to remain. That's not nothing. It took me a while to understand that it's not nothing. Daniel and I talk now, not frequently, not the way we used to. There is a specific quality to our conversations that didn't exist before. A carefulness on both sides, like two people navigating a room in the dark. We don't talk about TerraVault. We don't talk about the money. We talk about our parents, about the things brothers talk about when they are trying to remain brothers. I don't know what he knew. I have gone back and forth on that question so many times that it no longer resolves into anything clean. Some days I think he was a victim the same as me, just further up the chain. Some days the rage comes back, and I think about the phone call on that Tuesday. His voice, the way he said, "I wanted you in," like it was a gift. On those days I close whatever I'm doing and I go for a walk and I come back and make something to eat and I don't call him. I still have the coffee maker that grinds the beans for you. It was the one thing I've refused to put in storage. I use it every morning. I grind the beans and I stand at the counter and I listen to the sound of it and I let it be exactly what it is. A small machine doing a small job. And then I pour the coffee into a mug and I drink it standing up. Because I like standing up, the Sunday Bank app ritual is back. Not every Sunday, maybe twice a month. The number is different, much smaller, but it exists and it's mine, and it did not exist 6 months ago. I am 32 years old. I have a window that faces a street, and a plant that mostly survives, and a brother I'm not sure what to do with, and 2 friends who have chosen to stay. I owe people money I am slowly paying back. I have a savings account with a number in it that I am building again, dollar by dollar, in the most ordinary, incremental, unsexy way that you can possibly build a thing. I open the app and I look at the number and I close it. That is the whole story. I wanted you to know all of it because I think there are versions of me reading this right now. People who got the phone call, who opened the document, who looked at the dashboard and felt something loosen in their chest at the upward curve. And what I want to say to those people is not, don't be stupid. What I want to say is, be careful with wanting. Be careful with the specific kind of wanting that makes you look for evidence only in one direction. That wanting is human. It is not weakness, but it is a door. And some, once you walk through, take a very long time to come back from. I'm still coming back. I'll let you know when I get there.